I never imagined that desperation could be measured in pounds sterling, but on the day the Duke of Ashford offered me 5,000 of them, I learned that everything, even dignity, has its price. The sum hung in the air between us like smoke from the dying fire in his study, and I knew that if I refused, my sister would not see another spring. It was November when I first stood in that room. Rain streaking the tall windows behind him, the smell of old leather and tobacco filling the silence. I had been governess to the Fairfax children for 3 years, teaching French verbs and watercolor techniques to girls who would never need to work a day in their lives. My own life was different. I rose before dawn, slept in a room barely larger than a closet, and sent every spare shilling home to Amelia, my younger sister, whose lungs had been weak since birth. The doctor's bills mounted like snowdrifts, and I was drowning in them. The Duke had summoned me to Ashford Manor on a grey afternoon. I had never met him before, though I knew his name the way everyone in England knew it. Julian Ashford, 5th Duke of Ashford, widower, recluse, a man whose grief had become as famous as his title. His wife had died 3 years earlier in circumstances that society whispered about but never fully explained. Since then, he had withdrawn from public life, leaving his estates to run themselves while he haunted the halls of his ancestral home like a ghost. I stood in the entrance hall that day, water dripping from my cloak onto marble floors that reflected the chandelier overhead like a frozen lake. A butler, silent and efficient, led me through corridors lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors. The house felt cold, not from temperature, but from absence, as if warmth had been deliberately banished from its walls. He was standing by the window when I entered his study, a tall figure silhouetted against the stormy light. He did not turn immediately, and I had time to observe him. Dark hair, though I could see threads of silver at his temples, broad shoulders held rigid, as if braced against some invisible weight. When he finally faced me, I saw eyes the color of winter twilight, gray and distant and impossibly sad. He did not waste time on pleasantries. His voice, when he spoke, was low and carefully controlled, the voice of a man who had learned to keep his emotions locked away. "Miss Hartwell," he said, "I understand you are in need of funds." I did not ask how he knew. Men like him always knew everything about the people they summoned. I simply nodded, my hands clasped before me, feeling the threadbare patches on my gloves. He explained his proposition with the precision of a business transaction. He needed a wife, or rather, the appearance of one. Society had begun to pressure him to remarry, to produce an heir, to rejoin the world of balls and dinner parties and country weekends that made up the aristocratic season. He had no interest in any of it, but his position demanded certain performances. He would pay me £5,000 to pose as his wife for 3 months through the winter season. I would attend events at his side, play the role of Duchess, and then disappear back into obscurity when spring came. The offer was preposterous. It was also impossible to refuse. I thought of Amelia in her narrow bed, coughing blood into handkerchiefs she tried to hide from me. I thought of the doctor who had stopped coming because we could no longer pay him. I thought of the line between life and death and how it could be drawn in currency. What would be required of me, I asked. My voice sounded strange in that vast room, small and uncertain. He listed the terms as if reading from a contract. I would live at Ashford Manor. I would be fitted for appropriate gowns and jewels. I would learn the history of his family, the names and faces I needed to know. I would attend balls, dinners, the opera. I would be charming, elegant, devoted. I would be, in all visible ways, the Duchess of Ashford. And when the season ended, I would take my payment and vanish. No one would ever know the truth. And what of my reputation, I said. If this deception were discovered, I would be ruined. He met my eyes then, and I saw something flicker in his expression, something that might have been guilt or perhaps understanding. "You already have no reputation, Miss Hartwell," he said quietly. "You are a governess. Society does not see you at all. This way, at least, you will have money enough to live on your own terms. The cruelty of his words was matched only by their accuracy. I was invisible, a shadow in other people's houses, a woman with no prospects beyond teaching children who would forget my name the moment they outgrew the schoolroom. He was offering me a fortune for 3 months of pretense. What did it matter if it was built on lies? I will do it, I said. Something shifted in his face, a relaxation so subtle I almost missed it. Good, he said. You will begin tomorrow. My housekeeper will see to your accommodations. The seamstress will arrive in the afternoon. We attend our first event in 1 week. The season opens with a ball at the Pemberton estate. You will be ready. I nodded, though my heart was beating so hard I thought he must hear it. 1 week. 7 days to transform myself from Eleanor Hartwell, governess, into someone who could stand beside a duke and be believed. He dismissed me then, turning back to the window as if I had already ceased to exist. I left his study in a daze, following the butler back through those endless corridors. Outside, the rain had intensified, drumming against the roof like 1,000 urgent fingers. I stood in the doorway, looking out at the gray expanse of the Duke's grounds, and wondered what I had just agreed to. The following days blurred together in a flurry of activity. I sent word to the Fairfax family that I had been called away on urgent family business. It was not entirely a lie. I arranged for half of the Duke's payment to be sent immediately to Amelia's doctor, with instructions for her care. The rest would come when the season ended, when I had fulfilled my part of this strange bargain. Ashford Manor became my world. It was a house of contradictions, grand and cold, beautiful and hollow. My room was in the East Wing, a suite of chambers that had belonged to the late Duchess. When I first saw it, I froze in the doorway. The housekeeper, Mrs. Daventry, a stern woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, watched me carefully. His Grace thought you would be comfortable here, she said. Everything has been prepared. But this was her room, I said, unable to keep the tremor from my voice. Mrs. Daventry's expression softened, just slightly. It was, she said. But she is gone, Miss Hartwell, and the room must be used. I stepped inside. The walls were papered in silk, pale blue with silver threads that caught the light. The bed was enormous, draped in white linens that smelled of lavender. There was a writing desk by the window, a wardrobe large enough to house a family, and a dressing table with a mirror that reflected my plain face and worn dress with brutal honesty. This is where I would become someone else. The seamstress arrived that afternoon, a thin Frenchwoman named Madame Colette, who circled me like a bird of prey, making soft clicking sounds with her tongue. She took measurements with practiced efficiency, her hands cool and impersonal. The Duke had given her instructions, apparently, a list of what would be needed. Evening gowns, morning dresses, riding habits, cloaks and gloves and shoes. I stood still while she worked, feeling like a doll being prepared for display. You have good posture, she said in accented English. And your figure, it is acceptable. We will make you beautiful, yes. I said nothing. Beautiful seemed like an impossible goal. Over the next days, the Duke and I met each evening in his study. He would sit behind his desk, a stack of papers before him, and quiz me on the details I needed to know. The family history going back 5 generations. The names of every important member of the aristocracy, their relationships, their scandals, their allegiances. The proper forms of address. The intricate rules of precedence that governed who entered a room first, who sat where at dinner, who danced with whom at balls. I absorbed it all with the same focus I had once used to learn Latin and Greek. Information was power, even borrowed power, even false power. If I was going to play this role, I would play it perfectly. He was a patient teacher, though distant. He never touched me, never came closer than the width of his desk. He spoke in that same controlled voice, emotion carefully locked away. Only once did I glimpse something beneath the surface. I had asked him about his late wife, thinking I should know something of her if I was to take her place. even temporarily. His face closed like a door slamming shut. "That is not part of our arrangement," he said, his voice suddenly cold. "You need know nothing of her except that she is dead." I did not ask again. The night before the ball, I could not sleep. I lay in the late Duchess's bed, staring at the canopy overhead, and tried to imagine walking into a ballroom on the Duke's arm. I had never attended such an event in my life. My experience of high society was limited to watching my charges being prepared for their own debuts, helping them practice their curtsies and their polite conversation. I knew the rules, but I had never lived them. Fear sat on my chest like a stone. What if I failed? What if someone saw through the deception immediately? What if I disgraced him, ruined everything, and lost not only the money, but any chance of helping Amelia? But beneath the fear was something else, something I did not want to name. Curiosity, excitement, a small, shameful part of me that wanted to know what it felt like to be someone else, even for a night. To wear silk and jewels, to be looked at, seen, desired, to matter even if it was a lie. The morning of the ball arrived cold and bright. I woke to find that a breakfast tray had been left in my room, and beside it, a note in Mrs. Daventry's precise handwriting. The dressers would arrive at noon to begin preparing me. I was to eat well and rest. Tonight would be long. I picked at the food, my stomach too tight to accept much. I bathed in water scented with rose oil. I sat at the dressing table and watched my reflection as if it belonged to someone else. When the dressers arrived, they transformed me with an efficiency that was almost frightening. My hair, usually pinned back in a simple knot, was washed and dried and curled into an elaborate arrangement of braids and ringlets. They worked oils into my skin until it gleamed. They painted my lips with a subtle tint, darkened my lashes, added the faintest touch of color to my cheeks. And then came the dress. Madame Colette had outdone herself. The gown was blue silk, the color of a clear winter sky, cut low across the shoulders, fitted tight at the waist, flowing into layers of fabric that whispered when I moved. Pearls had been sewn into the bodice, catching the light with every breath. Long white gloves covered my arms to above the elbow. A necklace of sapphires and diamonds, borrowed from the Ashford collection, rested cold against my throat. When they finally stepped back, I looked at the mirror and did not recognize myself. The woman looking back was elegant, refined, every inch a duchess. Only my eyes were my own, wide and frightened and utterly out of place. "You are ready, Miss Hartwell," Mrs. Daventry said softly. "His Grace is waiting." I followed her down the grand staircase, my hand gripping the banister for support, the heavy skirts making each step careful and deliberate. The Duke stood at the bottom, dressed in black evening wear, a silver waistcoat and white cravat at his throat. He was staring at something in the middle distance, his expression unreadable. And then he looked up and saw me. I watched his face change. The careful control slipped. His eyes widened. His lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. For a long moment, he simply stared, and I saw something in his expression that I had never seen before, something raw and unguarded and almost like pain. He looked at me as if I were a ghost come back to haunt him. "Your Grace," I said quietly when I reached the bottom step, and his eyes focused on mine, sharp and suddenly intense. "Miss Hartwell," he said, his voice rough. "You look," he paused, and I saw him swallow. "You look perfect." But that was not what he had meant to say. I saw it in the way his hands clenched at his sides, the way his jaw tightened. He had meant to say something else entirely, something he could not allow himself to speak. "The carriage is ready," he said, offering me his arm with stiff formality. I placed my gloved hand on his sleeve, feeling the tension in his body, and together we walked out into the cold November night. The ball awaited us. Society awaited us. And I, Eleanor Hartwell, governess, invisible woman, was about to step into a life that was never meant to be mine. I only prayed I would not shatter under the weight of it. The Pemberton estate blazed with light against the darkness, every window glowing like a star brought down to earth. As our carriage rolled up the long drive, I could see other vehicles ahead of us, a procession of the wealthy and titled converging on this single point. My heart hammered against my ribs, each beat a reminder of how far I had strayed from everything I knew. The Duke sat across from me in silence. He had not spoken since we left Ashford Manor, and I had not dared to break the quiet. In the dim light of the carriage, his face was shadowed, unreadable, but I could feel his tension, thick as the expensive fabric of my gown, and I wondered if he regretted this entire arrangement. Perhaps seeing me dressed as his wife had made the deception too real, too painful. Perhaps he was remembering her, the woman who had worn these jewels before me, who had ridden in this same carriage to events just like this one. I wanted to say something, to ask if he was well, but the words stuck in my throat. We were not friends. We were not even truly partners. We were two people bound by a contract, playing roles for an audience that would devour us both if they sensed weakness. The carriage stopped. A footman opened the door. The Duke descended first, then turned to offer me his hand. I took it, feeling the warmth of his palm through our gloves, and stepped down onto the gravel drive. The night air was cold and sharp, carrying the scent of wood smoke and expensive perfumes. Around us, other guests were emerging from their carriages, women in jewels and furs, men in dark evening wear, all of them moving toward the entrance with the practiced ease of people who belonged. I did not belong. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to climb back into the carriage and beg to be taken home. But home was a rented room I could no longer afford. Home was Amelia dying slowly in a charity hospital. This, terrifying as it was, this was my only chance. The Duke's hand moved to the small of my back, a light touch that steadied me. "Remember," he said quietly, his lips barely moving. "You are the Duchess of Ashford. You have nothing to prove to anyone here. They should be honored by your presence, not the other way around." It was the first truly kind thing he had said to me, and the unexpectedness of it gave me courage. I lifted my chin, squared my shoulders, and let him guide me forward. The entrance hall of Pemberton House was a marvel of marble and gilt, grand enough to make even Ashford Manor seem modest. Servants in livery took our cloaks. A majordomo announced each arrival in a voice that echoed off the high ceiling. I watched other couples ahead of us, noting how the women smiled, how the men nodded to acquaintances, how everyone moved through this ritual with choreographed precision. And then it was our turn. The Duke offered me his arm, and I took it, my hand trembling slightly against his sleeve. "His Grace, the Duke of Ashford," the majordomo called out, his voice carrying over the hum of conversation. "And Her Grace, the Duchess of Ashford." The noise in the hall stuttered, stopped. Every head turned toward us. I felt the weight of their stares like a physical thing, dozens of eyes assessing, judging, trying to understand. The Duke had been absent from society for 3 years. His sudden reappearance would have been noteworthy enough. But with a wife no one had heard of, a wife who appeared from nowhere fully formed, that was scandal. That was gossip. That was exactly the kind of thing these people lived for. I kept my expression serene, my posture perfect, even as my pulse raced. The Duke moved forward, and I moved with him, our steps matched, our bodies aligned as if we had been walking together for years. We entered the ballroom, and the whispers began, a susurrus of speculation that followed us like smoke. The ballroom was magnificent. Chandeliers dripping with crystals hung from a painted ceiling, depicting some pastoral scene of gods and shepherds. The walls were paneled in white and gold. Hothouse flowers spilled from enormous vases, filling the air with their heavy perfume. Musicians played from a gallery above, the strains of a waltz floating down over the assembled guests. And everywhere, People watched us. A woman approached, tall and regal with silver hair piled high and diamonds at her throat. Lady Pemberton, our hostess. She smiled, but her eyes were calculating. "Your Grace," she said to the Duke, inclining her head. "What a delightful surprise. We had quite given up hope of seeing you in society again." "Lady Pemberton," the Duke replied with a slight bow. "May I present my wife, Eleanor?" Her gaze shifted to me, sharp and assessing. I met her eyes steadily, remembering what the Duke had told me. I was the Duchess of Ashford. I had nothing to prove. "Your Grace," Lady Pemberton said to me, and I heard the question beneath the courtesy. "How extraordinary. We heard no announcement of your marriage. It was a private ceremony," I said, my voice calm, though my heart was wild. "His Grace values discretion in personal matters." Her smile did not waver, but I saw the flicker of frustration, the hunger for more information that would not be satisfied tonight. "Of course," she said. "How lovely. You must tell me all about how you met. But later. For now, please enjoy the evening. There are so many people eager to make your acquaintance." She glided away, and others took her place. A steady stream of introductions and polite interrogations disguised as conversation. I smiled and nodded and gave carefully vague answers to every probing question. The Duke remained at my side, his presence a solid anchor, and whenever I faltered, he would add some small comment that steered the conversation away from dangerous ground. But even as I navigated this minefield of social interaction, I was aware of something else. I was aware of how people looked at the Duke when they thought he was not watching. There was pity in some faces, speculation in others, and occasionally something darker: suspicion, doubt. As if his grief had lasted too long, as if there was something unnatural in the way he had withdrawn from the world. And I understood, with a cold certainty, that this performance was not just about maintaining appearances. It was about survival. Whatever had happened to his first wife, whatever circumstances surrounded her death, society had judged him for it. This charade, this carefully constructed fiction of a happy remarriage, this was his way of reclaiming his place, of silencing the whispers that must have haunted him for 3 years. I felt a surge of unexpected sympathy for him. We were both pretending, both hiding, both desperately trying to be something we were not. The orchestra struck up a new waltz, and the Duke turned to me. "I believe this is our dance," he said. I had known this moment would come. I had practiced the steps with the dancing master he had hired, had learned to follow a lead, to move with grace and confidence. But knowing and doing were different things, and as he led me onto the dance floor, I felt my courage waver. His hand found my waist, his other hand clasped mine, and suddenly we were moving, spinning into the pattern of the dance. I focused on his shoulder, on the rhythm of the music, on anything except the faces watching us from the edges of the room. "You are doing well," he said quietly, his voice for my ears alone. "I feel like I'm about to fall," I admitted. "Then fall toward me," he said. "I will catch you." Something in his tone made me look up, and I found his eyes on mine, intense and searching. We were close, closer than we had ever been, close enough that I could see the shadows beneath his eyes, the tightness at the corners of his mouth, close enough to feel the warmth of him, to smell the faint scent of sandalwood and something else, something that was uniquely him. "Why are you really doing this?" I asked suddenly, the words escaping before I could stop them. "It is not just about society, is it? There is something else. Something you are not telling me." His expression shuddered. "That is not part of our arrangement," he said. "But it should be," I pressed, my voice low and urgent. "If I am to play this role convincingly, I need to understand why it matters so much. What are you afraid of?" His grip on my waist tightened, just slightly. "I am afraid," he said slowly, each word carefully chosen, "that if I remain alone much longer, I will forget how to be anything else." The honesty of it stole my breath. For a moment, we simply danced, the music swelling around us, and I saw beneath his careful control to the man underneath, lonely, haunted, trapped in a grief he could not escape and could not express. "I am sorry," I said softly, "about your wife, about whatever happened." "Do not be sorry," he said, and there was an edge to his voice now, something sharp and painful. "You know nothing about it. You know nothing about her." The dance ended. He released me abruptly and stepped back, his face once again a mask of polite indifference. "Thank you for the dance," he said formally, and then he turned and walked away, leaving me standing alone in the middle of the ballroom. I felt the stares, heard the whispers intensify. A married couple arguing, or at least showing strain. That was more fodder for gossip. I lifted my chin and moved to the edge of the room, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing servant and trying to look as if nothing was wrong. But everything was wrong. I had pushed too hard, asked too much. I had forgotten my place. A woman appeared beside me, younger than most of the guests, perhaps a few years older than myself. She had auburn hair and kind eyes, and when she spoke, her voice was gentle. "Forgive me for intruding," she said, "but you looked as if you could use a friendly face. I am Catherine Fairchild. My husband is the Earl of Thornbury." I remembered the name from my lessons. Thornbury, a minor title, respectable but not particularly powerful. "I am Eleanor," I said, "the Duchess of Ashford." "Yes, I know," she said with a small smile. "The entire room knows. You have quite disrupted the evening, you realize. Everyone had theories about whether the Duke would ever remarry, and now here you are, a complete mystery." "I am sorry if our presence has caused inconvenience," I said carefully. She laughed, a bright, genuine sound. "Oh, do not apologize. It is the most interesting thing to happen this season. And between you and me, I think it is wonderful. The Duke has been alone for far too long. Whatever people say, he deserves happiness. Whatever people say." The phrase hung between us, heavy with implication. "What do people say?" I asked, unable to help myself. Catherine's smile faded. She glanced around, then leaned closer. "They say his first wife's death was not an accident," she whispered. "They say there was an argument, that she fell, that he was there when it happened. No charges were brought, no investigation, but the rumors," she trailed off, looking uncomfortable. "I do not believe them, of course. The Duke is a good man. But society can be cruel. My blood ran cold, an accident, a fall, an argument, and the Duke's desperate need to rehabilitate his reputation, to appear normal, happily remarried, beyond suspicion. I had agreed to help a man whose wife might have died under mysterious circumstances. A man who might be dangerous, or who might be innocent and drowning in undeserved suspicion. I did not know which frightened me more. "Thank you for telling me," I said to Catherine, though my voice sounded distant to my own ears. She touched my arm lightly. "If you need anything, if you ever want to talk, please know that you have a friend," she said. "I know how difficult it can be, navigating this world." I nodded, unable to speak, and she drifted away, back to her husband, leaving me alone with my spiraling thoughts. The Duke reappeared sometime later, his expression neutral, as if our tense exchange on the dance floor had never happened. "We should make our rounds," he said. "There are still people expecting to be introduced." I followed him through the rest of the evening in a daze. We spoke to elderly dowagers and young debutantes, to military men and politicians, to everyone who mattered in this glittering, suffocating world. I smiled and nodded and said all the right things, but my mind was elsewhere. Turning over Catherine's words, trying to reconcile them with the man beside me. He did not seem like a murderer. But then, what did murderers seem like? Was there some mark on them, some visible sign of guilt? Or could they walk among us, charming and polite, their secrets locked away where no one could see? The night wore on. My feet ached in the delicate slippers. My face hurt from smiling. The champagne and the heat and the endless noise pressed down on me until I thought I might scream. Finally, mercifully, the Duke indicated it was time to leave. We made our farewells to Lady Pemberton, endured her arch comments about hoping to see us again soon, and escaped into the cold night air. The carriage ride home was even more silent than the journey there. I sat in my corner, the Duke in his, the space between us thick with unspoken words. I wanted to ask him about his wife, about what really happened, but I could not find the courage. And perhaps it was better not to know. Perhaps ignorance was safer. When we arrived at Ashford Manor, he helped me down from the carriage and walked me to the entrance. At the door, he paused. "You did well tonight," he said. "Better than I had any right to expect." "Thank you," I said. "I tried." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something in his expression that made my breath catch. Vulnerability, loneliness, a question he did not know how to ask. "Eleanor," he said, my name rough in his mouth, "about what I said during the dance, about being alone." "You do not need to explain," I said quickly. "No," he said. "I do. Because you were right. You should know why this matters, why you being here, why this pretense, why it is important." He took a breath, and I waited, my heart pounding. "My wife did die in a fall," he said quietly. "We had argued. She ran from me. She was on the stairs. She slipped. I tried to catch her, but I was too far away. And when she died, society decided I was to blame, not legally. There was no evidence of foul play, but in their minds, I was guilty, of neglect, of cruelty, of something. And I have been sentenced to isolation ever since. I am sorry," I whispered. "I do not want your pity," he said, his voice hardening. "I want—" He stopped, and his jaw worked as if the words were physically difficult to produce. "I want to stop being treated like a monster. I want my life back. And you, standing beside me, you give me that chance." The honesty of it cut through me. He was not using me, not really, or rather, we were using each other. He needed respectability. I needed money. It was a transaction, nothing more. But as I looked at him standing there in the darkness, his face etched with pain and exhaustion and desperate hope, I felt something shift inside me, something dangerous. Sympathy. Connection. The first fragile thread of something that could, if I was not careful, become much more. "Good night, Your Grace," I said, stepping back before I could do something foolish. "Good night, Eleanor," he said, and the way he said my name, soft and almost tender, followed me all the way to my room. I lay awake for hours that night, still wearing the sapphires at my throat, too exhausted to remove them. The ball replayed in my mind, every conversation, every stare, every moment of tension and triumph. I had survived. I had not shattered under the weight of the deception. I had played my part, but I had also learned something far more complicated. The Duke was not what I had expected. He was not cold or cruel or indifferent. He was broken. And broken things, I knew from experience, were dangerous to touch. They had sharp edges. They cut you when you tried to hold them. I should maintain my distance. I should remember this was business. I should protect my heart. But as I finally drifted toward sleep, it was his voice I heard, low and aching in the darkness. "I want to stop being treated like a monster. I want my life back." And I realized, with a cold clarity that terrified me, that I wanted to give it to him. The days following the Pemberton ball settled into a rhythm that was at once strange and oddly comfortable. I woke each morning in rooms that still felt borrowed, ate breakfast that servants brought without my asking, and spent my afternoons preparing for the endless parade of social obligations that defined the season. Tea with dowagers who asked pointed questions, dinners with politicians and their calculating wives. The opera, where we sat in the Ashford box and pretended to watch the performance while society watched us instead. And through it all, the Duke was there, distant but present, formal but not unkind, We moved through these events like dancers who had learned the steps perfectly, each of us knowing our role, neither of us stepping out of line. But something had changed after that first ball. Some wall between us had developed a crack, thin and barely visible, but there nonetheless. I felt it in small moments. The way his hand would linger an extra second when he helped me from the carriage. The way he would sometimes pause mid-sentence during our evening briefings, as if forgetting what he meant to say. The way he looked at me when he thought I was not paying attention. And I felt it in myself, too. The way my breath would catch when he entered a room. The way I found myself listening for his footsteps in the corridor. The way I had begun to think of him not as His Grace, the Duke, but simply as Julian, though I never spoke his given name aloud. It was dangerous. I knew it was dangerous. But knowing and stopping are different things entirely. A week after the Pemberton ball, I received a letter from Amelia's doctor. The money had arrived. Treatment had begun. She was responding well, showing signs of improvement. Relief flooded through me so intensely, I had to sit down, my hands shaking as I held the paper. This was why I was here. This was what mattered. My sister's life, her future, her chance at recovery. The rest of it, the confusing feelings, the growing attachment to a man who was not truly my husband, none of that could be allowed to matter. I found the Duke in the library that afternoon. He was standing by the window, a book in his hands, but his eyes on the gardens beyond. The winter sun cast long shadows across the floor, and dust motes danced in the light like tiny stars. "Your Grace," I said, and he turned, his expression softening when he saw me. "Eleanor," he said, "is something wrong?" "No," I said. "The opposite, actually. I received word from my sister's doctor. She is improving. The treatment is working." Something flickered in his face, something that looked almost like relief. "I am glad," he said quietly. "That is good news." "I wanted to thank you," I said. "Without your—" I hesitated, searching for the right word. "Without this arrangement, she would have had no chance." He set the book down and crossed to where I stood. "You earned that money, Eleanor," he said. "You have been—" He paused, and I saw him struggle with the words. "You have been everything I needed you to be. More, perhaps." The air between us felt suddenly thick, charged with something I could not name. We stood too close, closer than propriety allowed, and I could see the fine details of his face. The small scar above his left eyebrow, the silver threading through the dark hair at his temples, the way his eyes were not purely gray, but flecked with bits of blue, like storm clouds breaking. "I should go," I said, though I did not move. "I should prepare for this evening." We were to attend a dinner at the home of Lord and Lady Westbrook, an influential couple whose good opinion mattered in ways I was only beginning to understand. "Eleanor," he said, my name soft in his mouth, "before you go, there is something I want to show you." He led me deeper into the library, past shelves of leather-bound volumes, to a corner where several portraits hung on the wall. Family members, I assumed. Generations of Ashfords staring down with varying degrees of severity. But he stopped before one portrait in particular. It showed a young woman, perhaps 25, with dark hair and delicate features. She wore a green dress and pearls, and she was smiling, a real smile that reached her eyes. "This was Victoria," he said quietly. "My wife." I looked at her face, trying to find some clue, some answer to the questions that haunted me. She was beautiful, but more than that, she looked alive, vibrant, full of joy. "She was kind," he continued, his voice taking on a quality I had never heard before, something raw and unguarded. Everyone loved her. She had a way of making people feel seen, heard, important. She was— He stopped, swallowing hard. "She was everything good that I was not." "I do not believe that," I said softly. He looked at me then, and I saw pain in his eyes, deep and old and still bleeding. "You do not know what I did," he said, "what I failed to do." Tell me, I said. He was silent for a long moment, his gaze returning to the portrait. We married young, he said finally. It was arranged, as these things often are, but we were fortunate. We liked each other. More than that, we were friends. And I believed, that friendship would be enough. That affection and respect and shared goals would sustain a marriage. But it was not enough, I said, understanding beginning to dawn. He shook his head. She wanted more. She wanted passion, romance, the kind of love that consumes you. And he gestured helplessly, I am not built for that. I am too controlled, too careful, too locked inside myself. I tried to give her what she needed, but I failed. Again and again, I failed. His voice had gone rough, thick with emotion, and I wanted to touch him, to offer comfort, but I did not dare. She grew unhappy, he continued, restless. We argued more. About small things at first, then larger ones. About whether to move to London for the season. About her desire to travel, to see the world, while I wanted to remain here, managing the estates. About... He stopped, and his jaw clenched. About a child we could not seem to have. I felt the weight of that admission, the private grief embedded in those words. The night she died, we had argued again, he said. About something trivial. I cannot even remember what now. But she was so angry, and I was tired, and I said things I should not have said. She ran from the room. I followed, but not immediately. I thought she needed time to calm down. By the time I reached the stairs, she was already at the top, moving too fast, and her slipper caught on her hem. He closed his eyes, as if trying to shut out the memory. I watched her fall, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I watched, and I could not reach her in time. She hit the marble floor, and there was blood, so much blood, and she looked at me, just for a moment before her eyes closed, and in that look I saw, he broke off, his hands clenching into fists. I saw blame, accusation, as if she knew, even in that final moment, that I had failed her one last time. The silence that followed was heavy, oppressive. I stood beside him, this man who had been carrying this weight alone for 3 years, and I finally understood the depth of his grief. It was not just loss, it was guilt. The terrible, corrosive guilt of believing you caused the death of someone you should have protected. It was an accident, I said firmly. You did not push her. You did not cause her to fall. It was a terrible, tragic accident. That is what the magistrate said, he replied. That is what the servants said. But society does not believe in accidents when there is a convenient villain. And I could not defend myself because part of me, he looked at me, his eyes hollow. Part of me believes they are right. No, I said, and this time I did reach out, placing my hand on his arm. No, you cannot carry that. You cannot blame yourself for something you did not do. He stared at my hand on his sleeve as if he had never been touched before. Why are you kind to me? He asked. Why do you not see what everyone else sees? Because I see the truth, I said. I see a man who is grieving, a man who loved his wife, even if not in the way she wanted, a man who is trying to survive a loss that nearly destroyed him. That is not a monster. That is human. Something shifted in his expression, something vulnerable and almost frightened. Eleanor, he said, and the way he said my name made my heart lurch. You do not know me. You do not know what I am capable of. Then show me, I said. Stop hiding. Stop pretending you are made of stone. Show me who you really are. For a moment, I thought he would. I thought he would finally let down the last of his defenses, would let me see past the careful control to whatever lay beneath. But then the clock in the hall chimed the hour, breaking the spell, and he stepped back, the mask sliding back into place. We should prepare for dinner, he said, his voice once again formal, distant. We must not be late. I nodded, disappointment sharp in my chest, and followed him from the library. But as we walked, I carried with me the memory of his confession, the trust he had placed in me. And I knew that whatever was growing between us had just become infinitely more complicated. The Westbrook dinner was a smaller affair than the Pemberton ball, only 30 guests. But that made it in some ways more dangerous. There were fewer places to hide, fewer distractions from the scrutiny. We sat at a long table gleaming with silver and crystal, and the conversation flowed around us like a river we had to navigate without drowning. Lord Westbrook was a large man with a booming voice and political ambitions. His wife was thin and sharp-eyed, with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. They were polite to me, but I sensed their skepticism. A duchess who appeared from nowhere, with no family connections they recognized, no pedigree they could trace. I was an anomaly, and anomalies made people suspicious. "Your Grace," Lady Westbrook said to me, her voice carrying down the table, "you must tell us about your family. We are all so curious about your background." The question was a trap. I could feel it. But I had prepared for this, had practiced my answers until they sounded natural. "My family is quite modest," I said with a slight smile. "My father was a clergyman in Kent. He passed some years ago, leaving my sister and myself with little. I worked as a governess before." I paused, glancing at the Duke. "Before I met His Grace." "A governess," Lady Westbrook said, her tone sharpening. "How extraordinary! And how did you and the Duke meet?" This was the dangerous part. The Duke and I had crafted a story, but it had to be delivered perfectly. "I was employed by a family in the Duke's acquaintance," I said. "He visited their estate and we were introduced. It was," I allowed a small, shy smile. "It was quite unexpected for both of us." The Duke reached over and placed his hand over mine on the table, the gesture surprising and tender. "I could not help myself," he said, his voice warm. Eleanor was unlike anyone I had ever met, intelligent, compassionate, utterly genuine. I knew within a week that I wanted her to be my wife. The other guests made appreciative noises, charmed by this romantic tale. Lady Westbrook's expression remained skeptical, but she could not challenge the Duke's word directly. "How lovely," she said. "A love match. How very modern of you, Your Grace." There was an edge to her words, an implication that modern was not necessarily a compliment. But the Duke simply smiled and squeezed my hand, and the conversation moved on to safer topics. Throughout the rest of the meal, his hand remained over mine. It was for show, I knew that, a performance for our audience, but his touch felt real, warm and solid and oddly comforting. And when I glanced at him once, I found his eyes on me, something in his expression that was not entirely acting. After dinner, the ladies retired to the drawing room while the men remained for brandy and cigars. I found myself trapped in a conversation with 3 elderly matrons who wanted to know every detail of my trousseau, my household management, my opinions on everything from servants to china patterns. I answered as best I could, drawing on my years of observing wealthy families, but I felt like an imposter with every word. Catherine Fairchild rescued me, appearing at my elbow with a bright smile. "Ladies," she said, "you must forgive me, but I simply must steal the Duchess away. There is a matter we discussed at the Pemberton ball that I am dying to hear more about." She guided me to a quieter corner of the room, away from the others, and handed me a glass of sherry. "You looked like you needed saving," she said. "I did," I admitted. "Thank you." "It can be overwhelming," she said. "All these people picking you apart, looking for flaws. But you are doing wonderfully. Truly." "I do not feel like I am," I said quietly. "None of us do," she said. "That is the secret. We are all just pretending, all trying to meet impossible standards. The only difference is how well we hide our fear." I looked at her, this woman who seemed so confident, so perfectly at ease, and saw something genuine in her expression. Kindness, understanding, the possibility of real friendship. "May I ask you something?" I said. "Of course. Why are you being kind to me? You do not know me. For all you know, I could be exactly what some people whisper, an opportunist, a nobody who trapped a duke. Her smile was sad. "Because I know what it is like to be judged," she said. "My husband is the third son of a second son. We have a title but no money, no real influence. I married him for love, not for position, and society never quite forgave me for it. So when I see someone else struggling against their expectations, I want to help." "Thank you," I said, meaning it deeply. "And between you and me," she added, leaning closer, "I think the Duke looks at you the way my husband looks at me. Like you matter. Like you are more than just a convenience." Her words stayed with me through the rest of the evening, through the carriage ride home, through the silent walk to my chambers. Did the Duke look at me that way? And if he did, what did it mean? Was it part of the performance? Or was it something more, something real? I did not have answers. But as I lay in bed that night, I replayed every moment of the day. His confession in the library, his hand on mine at dinner, the way he had defended our fictional courtship with a warmth that felt genuine. And I realized that I was in serious danger. Not physical danger, though there were still moments when I wondered about his first wife's death, but emotional danger. The danger of forgetting this was temporary. The danger of believing in a fantasy that would end in 3 months when the season concluded and I took my payment and disappeared back into obscurity. I should protect myself. I should remember the contract, the arrangement, the truth of what this was. But my heart, foolish and stubborn, was already beginning to believe in a different story. One where the governess and the Duke found something real in the midst of their deception. One where broken people could heal each other. One where love could grow even in the coldest winter. It was a beautiful fantasy. And like all beautiful fantasies, it would hurt all the more when reality finally shattered it. The crisis came, as such things often do, without warning on an otherwise ordinary afternoon. We had been invited to a winter garden party at the Thornbury estate, Catherine's home. And the day was cold but bright, the kind of sharp winter sunlight that makes everything look crystalline and fragile. I wore a burgundy velvet walking dress and a fur-lined cloak, and the Duke looked handsome in his dark coat and top hat. Every inch the aristocrat. We had been attending events together for nearly 2 months now, and the routine had become almost comfortable. I knew which topics to avoid in conversation, which people to cultivate, how to smile and nod and deflect intrusive questions with practiced grace. The Duke and I had developed an ease with each other, a silent communication that allowed us to navigate society's treacherous waters as if we truly were long-married partners. But ease can make you careless. Comfort can make you forget the danger. The garden party was lovely, despite the cold. Catherine had arranged for braziers to be placed throughout the grounds, providing warmth, and servants circulated with hot cider and wine. Guests strolled through winter gardens where evergreens and holly provided color against the gray season. It was more relaxed than a ball or formal dinner, and I found myself actually enjoying it, laughing at something Catherine said, feeling almost like I belonged. The Duke had stepped away to speak with Lord Thornbury about some matter of estate management, leaving me with a small group of women near one of the braziers. We were discussing the upcoming Christmas season when I heard a voice behind me, sharp and carrying. Well, well, if it is not Miss Hartwell. Or should I say, Your Grace? I turned, my blood running cold. Standing there, wrapped in an expensive fur coat with a smirk on her thin lips, was Lady Hartwick, the mother of the family I had worked for before accepting the Duke's offer. She looked at me with undisguised malice, her eyes glittering with triumph. "Lady Hartwick," I said, keeping my voice steady, though my heart was racing. "What a surprise." "I imagine it is," she said, though not as much of a surprise as it was for me to hear that my former governess had somehow become the Duchess of Ashford. Quite a remarkable transformation, would you not say? The other women were watching now, sensing drama, their attention sharp and hungry. I felt my carefully constructed world beginning to crack. "His Grace and I met while I was in your employ," I said, clinging to the story we had crafted. These things happen sometimes, even across social boundaries. Do they? She said, her voice dripping with skepticism. How extraordinary that I never noticed any such acquaintance developing. How odd that you left my household so suddenly, without proper notice, claiming a family emergency. And how very convenient that within weeks you had become a duchess. She moved closer, her voice dropping to a stage whisper loud enough for everyone to hear. Tell me, Miss Hartwell, what did you do to secure such a prize? What lies did you tell? What traps did you set? I felt the words like slaps, felt the eyes of every woman there upon me, judging, speculating, and I knew with horrible certainty that Lady Hartwick could destroy everything. One word from her to the right people, one suggestion that our marriage was not what it seemed, and the gossip would spread like wildfire. The Duke's reputation, already fragile, would be shattered, and I would be exposed as a fraud. I have told no lies, I said, my voice shaking despite my efforts to control it, and I will not stand here and be insulted. I turned to walk away, but she grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in through the velvet. You are a servant, she hissed, a nobody, and when society learns the truth, when they discover what you really are, you will be cast out into the gutter where you belong. I suggest you release my wife immediately. The Duke's voice cut through the tension like a blade. He stood there, his face carved from ice, his eyes blazing with fury. Lady Hartwick released my arm and stepped back, but her expression remained defiant. Your Grace, she said with false sweetness, I was simply renewing my acquaintance with Miss Hartwell. We were just discussing her time in my household. Were you? He said, his voice dangerously soft. How fascinating. Because it sounded to me as if you were making unfounded accusations and treating the Duchess of Ashford with gross disrespect. Lady Hartwick's smile faltered. I was merely expressing surprise at the suddenness of your marriage, she said. Surely you can understand that society has questions. Society always has questions, the Duke said. That does not give you permission to insult my wife. Eleanor worked for your family with distinction, conducting herself with intelligence and grace. That I was fortunate enough to recognize her worth where you did not is to my credit, not hers shame. He moved to stand beside me, his presence solid and protective. And now, if you will excuse us, we have other guests to attend to. Good day, Lady Hartwick. He offered me his arm, and I took it, my hands trembling. We walked away together, leaving Lady Hartwick fuming behind us, the other women whispering furiously. Catherine hurried after us, her face concerned. Are you all right? She asked. That woman is poison. Everyone knows it. I am fine, I lied, though I felt anything but fine. We should leave, the Duke said quietly, before this becomes more of a spectacle than it already is. We made our apologies to Catherine and Lord Thornbury, claiming a headache on my part, and departed. The carriage ride back to Ashford Manor was silent, the air thick with tension. I sat in my corner, staring out the window, watching the countryside roll past in a blur of brown and gray, and tried not to cry. When we arrived home, the Duke followed me into the house, up the stairs, all the way to my chambers. I turned to face him in the doorway, my composure finally cracking. I am sorry, I said, my voice breaking. I should have handled that better. I should have been prepared for someone from my past to recognize me. You have nothing to apologize for, he said firmly. That woman is a vicious gossip who delights in cruelty. You did nothing wrong. But she will talk, I said. She will tell everyone that I was her governess, that our marriage is suspicious. She will destroy your reputation. Let her talk, he said, surprising me. I do not care. You should care, I said. This entire arrangement was about rehabilitating your standing in society. If that fails, if people believe you married inappropriately, married beneath you, it will only make things worse. He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him, and suddenly we were alone in a way we had never been before. Private, unobserved, just the two of us without the masks we wore for the world. "Do you want to know what I realized today?" he said, his voice intense. "When I saw that woman attacking you, when I saw you standing there trying to be strong while she tore at you with her words, do you know what I felt?" I shook my head, unable to speak. "Rage," he said, "pure, absolute rage. Not because of what it meant for my reputation or our arrangement, but because someone was hurting you. Because someone was making you feel small and worthless when you are neither of those things." And I realized, standing there, that somewhere along the way this stopped being about society's opinion. It stopped being about my dead wife and my guilt and my desperate need for redemption. "What did it become?" I whispered. "It became about you," he said. "About the way you make me feel less alone. About the way you look at me without pity or fear, just with understanding. About the way you have brought light back into this house, into my life, without even trying." He moved closer, and I could see his chest rising and falling with quick breaths, could see the emotion written plainly on his face. "I have been lying to myself," he continued, "telling myself this was just an arrangement, just a business transaction. But that is not true anymore, if it ever was. The truth is, Eleanor, I have come to care for you, deeply, more than I have any right to, more than I ever thought I could care for anyone again." My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. I wanted to tell him I felt the same, that somewhere in the midst of pretending to be his wife, I had started to wish it were real. But fear held me back. Fear of being hurt, of wanting something I could never truly have. "You do not mean that," I said. "You are grateful because I helped you. You are confusing gratitude with something else." "I am confusing nothing," he said. "I know exactly what I feel. The question is, what do you feel? When you look at me, do you see only your employer, only a contract, or do you see something more?" I could not answer, could not put into words the tangle of emotions churning inside me. So instead I did something reckless, something I had been wanting to do for weeks without admitting it to myself. I kissed him. It was clumsy at first, unpracticed. I had been kissed before, once, by a young man in the village when I was 17. But this was different. This was fire and need, and months of suppressed longing suddenly released. The Duke made a sound low in his throat. Surprise and desire mingled, and then his arms came around me, pulling me close, and he was kissing me back with an intensity that stole my breath. We broke apart, both breathing hard, staring at each other. His eyes were dark, his lips slightly swollen, and he looked more alive than I had ever seen him. "Eleanor," he said, my name a question and a prayer. "I do not want this to be pretend anymore," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "I do not want to be playing a role. I stopped, terrified of my own honesty. I want it to be real." His hands came up to cup my face, his touch gentle despite the emotion I could see shaking through him. "It is real," he said. "It has been real for longer than either of us wanted to admit." He kissed me again, softer this time, tender, and I felt something inside me crack open, some last defense crumbling away. I had spent so long being careful, being practical, protecting myself from hope. But hope had found me anyway, wrapped in a Duke's arms, in a house that was starting to feel like home. When we finally drew apart, he rested his forehead against mine, his breath warm against my skin. "I do not want you to leave when the season ends," he said quietly. "I want you to stay. Not as a hired actress, but as my wife. Truly, if you will have me." Before I could answer, before I could process the enormity of what he was asking, there was a sharp knock at the door. We sprang apart, guilty and flustered, and I called out, "Yes, who is it?" Mrs. Daventry entered, her face carefully neutral, though I was certain she had noted the Duke's presence in my chambers. "Forgive the intrusion, Your Grace," she said to me, "but there is a matter that requires your attention. A letter has arrived." "Urgent," the messenger said. She held out a sealed envelope. I took it, my hands still shaking from the Duke's kiss. and broke the seal. As I read the words written there, the floor seemed to drop away beneath my feet. The letter was from the hospital where Amelia was being treated. My sister had taken a turn for the worse. She was asking for me. If I wanted to see her alive, I needed to come immediately. "I have to go," I said, my voice hollow. "My sister. She is dying." The Duke read the letter over my shoulder, his expression going grim. "We will go together," he said. "The carriage can be ready within the hour." "No," I said, "you cannot. You have obligations here. The Ashford Christmas ball is in 3 days. Everyone expects us to attend." "Damn the ball," he said fiercely. "Damn society and their expectations. Your sister needs you. Nothing else matters." His words, his immediate support, broke something open inside me. I turned to him, tears finally spilling over, and he pulled me into his arms, holding me while I cried against his chest. "We will save her," he said into my hair. "Whatever it takes, whatever the cost, we will save her." Within 2 hours we were on the road, traveling through the winter night toward the hospital in London where Amelia lay dying. The Duke sat beside me in the carriage, his hand holding mine, his presence the only thing keeping me from falling apart completely. I told him about Amelia as we traveled, how she had been weak since birth, how our mother had died when I was 15 and she was 12, how our father had passed 2 years later, leaving us with nothing, how I had raised her as best I could, working as a governess to pay for her care, watching helplessly as she grew sicker, how the Duke's money had given us hope for the first time in years. "She is all I have," I said, "my only family. If I lose her, I lose everything." "You will not lose her," he said, "and you are not alone, not anymore." We arrived at the hospital near dawn, exhausted and desperate. A nurse led us to Amelia's room, a small space with a single narrow bed and a window that looked out over grey London streets. And there she was, my baby sister, so thin she seemed to barely exist beneath the white sheets, her face pale as paper, her breathing shallow and labored. "Ellie," she whispered when she saw me, her voice so faint I had to lean close to hear her. "You came." "Of course I came," I said, taking her hand. Feeling how cold and fragile it was, "I will always come." Her eyes drifted to the Duke, standing in the doorway. "Is that him?" she asked. "The Duke you wrote about?" "Yes," I said. "This is Julian." He moved closer, and I saw something shift in his expression as he looked at my dying sister. Compassion, determination. He knelt beside the bed, so he was at her level. "Amelia," he said gently, "your sister has told me much about you. You have been very brave." She managed a tiny smile. "She says you have been kind to her," Amelia whispered. "She says you make her happy." "She makes me happy too," he said, his eyes finding mine. "More than I knew was possible." "I am glad," Amelia said. "She deserves happiness. She deserves everything." Her eyes began to close, exhaustion pulling her back under, and I felt panic rise in my throat. "Do not leave me," I said. "Please, Amelia, fight. Stay with me." The Duke left the room, and I heard him speaking urgently to someone in the hall. He returned moments later with a doctor, a young man who looked tired but competent. They consulted in low voices while I held Amelia's hand and prayed to a God I was not sure I believed in. The Duke returned to my side. "The doctor says there is an experimental treatment," he said. "It is expensive and not guaranteed to work, but it is her best chance." "Then we do it," I said immediately, "whatever the cost." "It is already arranged," he said. "I have paid for everything. The treatment begins tonight. The next 3 days were a blur of waiting and hoping and praying. The Duke stayed with me the entire time, sleeping in chairs, bringing me food I could barely eat, holding me when fear threatened to overwhelm me. He missed the Ashford Christmas ball, sent word that we had been called away on urgent family business, and did not seem to care about the gossip such an absence would generate. All that mattered was Amelia. All that mattered was the slow, agonizing process of waiting to see if the treatment would work. And on the third day, as weak winter sun filtered through the hospital window, Amelia opened her eyes and spoke in a voice that was stronger than it had been. "I think I am hungry," she said. I burst into tears. The Duke laughed, actual laughter, the sound of relief and joy mingled together. The doctor confirmed that the treatment was working, that she was improving, that with continued care she would likely recover. We had saved her. Together, we had saved her. That night, after Amelia had fallen into a peaceful sleep, the Duke and I stood together at the hospital window, looking out over London. His arm was around my waist, and I leaned against him, exhausted but grateful. "Thank you," I said, "for everything, for coming with me, for paying for the treatment, for staying. You did not have to do any of it." "Yes, I did," he said simply, "because I love you." The words hung in the cold air, simple and devastating and true. "I love you too," I said, and felt the rightness of it settle into my bones. He turned me to face him, his hands gentle on my shoulders. "Then marry me," he said, "truly this time. Not for society, not for appearances, but because we choose each other, because we want to build a life together." I looked up at him, at this man who had begun as a stranger, who had hired me to play a role, who had somewhere along the way become the person I loved most in the world. "Yes," I said, "yes, I will marry you, for real this time." He kissed me there in that hospital corridor, with winter darkness pressing against the windows and the sound of my sister breathing peacefully in the room behind us. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that I had found my home. Not in a house or a title or a fortune, but in him, in us, in the love we had built from pretense and transformed into something true. We returned to Ashford Manor in early January, when the world was frozen and still, caught in that strange quiet between Christmas and the stirrings of spring that would not come for months yet. Amelia came with us, wrapped in blankets and furs, still weak but recovering, her cheeks showing the first faint traces of color after so many years of pallor. The Duke had insisted she stay with us, had prepared rooms in the East Wing near mine, had hired nurses and arranged for the best doctors in England to oversee her continued treatment. "She is your sister," he had said when I tried to thank him. "That makes her my sister too. She belongs with us." The word "us" had made my heart swell with a happiness I had not known was possible, but returning home meant facing what we had left behind. The gossip that had surely erupted after our sudden departure, Lady Hartwick's malicious whispers, the scandal of a duke who had missed his own Christmas ball to tend to his governess wife's sick sister. Society would not have been kind in our absence. I expected reproach when we arrived. I expected cold shoulders and whispered judgments. What I got instead was something far more unexpected. Mrs. Daventry greeted us at the door, her stern face softening when she saw Amelia. "Welcome home, Your Grace," she said to me, and there was warmth in her voice that had not been there before. "And welcome, Miss Amelia. Your rooms are ready." As we settled back into the house, I discovered that something had shifted in how the staff treated me. They no longer looked at me with the careful neutrality reserved for an outsider playing a role. They looked at me with respect, with affection, with the recognition that I belonged here, not as an imposter, but as their duchess. It was Mrs. Daventry who explained it to me a few days after our return, as I sat with her reviewing household matters. "If I may speak freely, Your Grace," she said. "Of course," I said. "When you first arrived," she said carefully, "I thought you were another of His Grace's mistakes, another choice made from desperation rather than sense. The staff, we all did. We had watched him suffer after Lady Victoria's death, watched him turn into a ghost, and we did not think any good could come from this sudden marriage." I nodded, understanding completely. I would have thought the same in their position. "But then we watched you," she continued. "We saw how you treated him, not with pity or fear, but with genuine care. We saw how you made him smile, made him laugh, brought him back to life. And when you left for London to tend to your sister, when His Grace went with you without hesitation, missing all his obligations, we understood. Understood what? I asked quietly. That you love each other, she said simply. Truly. And that whatever this marriage began as, it has become something real, something worth protecting. Her words stayed with me as I navigated the first weeks of the new year. The Duke and I had declared our love, had promised to make our marriage genuine, but we had not yet told anyone the truth of how it began. And now I realized, perhaps we never would. Perhaps the lie had served its purpose and could now be buried, replaced by a truth that was stronger and more beautiful than any deception. The invitations began arriving again. Lady Pemberton requesting our presence at a winter musicale, Lord and Lady Westbrook inviting us to a card party, Catherine Fairchild writing to say how glad she was that we were back, and that she hoped Amelia was recovering well. Society, it seemed, was ready to forgive our absence. But there was one invitation that surprised me more than the others. It came on heavy cream paper, sealed with wax, and when I opened it, I found an elegant script inviting the Duke and Duchess of Ashford to tea at the home of the Dowager Duchess of Marlborough. The Dowager was legendary in society, a woman in her 70s who had seen 3 kings crowned and wielded influence that made younger aristocrats tremble. An invitation from her was both an honor and a test. If she accepted us, society would follow. If she rejected us, we would remain outsiders forever. "We must go," the Duke said when I showed him the invitation. "But Eleanor, you should know." The Dowager knew Victoria. They were friends. "If anyone will see through our pretense, if anyone will question our marriage, it will be her." "Then we tell her the truth," I said. "Not all of it, but enough. We tell her that our marriage began as an arrangement, but became real. We trust her with our story and hope she understands." He looked at me with something like wonder. "You are braver than I am," he said. "No," I said. "I am simply done with lies. I am done pretending. Whatever we face it together. Honestly." The afternoon we were to visit the Dowager, I dressed with particular care. I wore a gown of deep emerald silk, simple but elegant, and the sapphire necklace that had become familiar around my throat. Amelia helped me with my hair, her fingers stronger now, her movements more assured. "You are nervous," she observed. "Terrified," I admitted. "Do not be," she said. "You are the Duchess of Ashford. Not because of a title, but because you have earned the right to stand beside him. Anyone who cannot see that is a fool." I hugged her, careful of her still fragile frame, and thanked whatever providence had let her survive. She was my reminder of what truly mattered. Not society's approval, but love, family, the people we chose to protect. The Dowager's London townhouse was magnificent, filled with art and antiques collected over a lifetime. We were shown to a drawing room where she waited, a tiny woman with white hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. She did not rise when we entered, but she smiled, and it transformed her face from intimidating to almost kind. "Your Grace," she said to the Duke, "how good to see you among the living again." And this, her eyes moved to me, is the mysterious bride we have all been so curious about. "Your Grace," I said, curtsying. "Thank you for receiving us." "Sit, sit," she said, gesturing to chairs across from her. Tea was poured by a silent maid, and then we were alone with her, just the 3 of us in that beautiful room. The Dowager studied us for a long moment, sipping her tea. Finally, she spoke. "I knew Victoria," she said without preamble. "She was a dear girl, troubled, but dear. And I know what they said about you after she died." She looked at the Duke. "I never believed it. Victoria's death was a tragedy, but it was not murder. It was the result of an unhappy woman making a careless choice in a moment of anger." The Duke's hand tightened on his teacup. "Thank you," he said hoarsely, "for saying that." "But I am curious about you," the dowager continued, her gaze shifting to me. "A governess who becomes a duchess, a woman who appears from nowhere and captures the heart of a man we all thought would never love again. Tell me, child, how did this extraordinary thing happen?" I looked at the Duke. He nodded slightly, giving me permission. So I told her. Not everything, but enough. I told her about the arrangement, the £5,000, the need to save my sister. I told her about the pretense, the ball, the slow transformation from acting to reality. I told her about falling in love despite myself, about choosing truth over convenience, about wanting to build something real from the ashes of deception. When I finished, the room was silent. The dowager set down her teacup with a soft click. "Well," she said, "that is quite the story. Quite irregular, quite scandalous if anyone knew the truth." My heart sank. We had gambled and lost. But then she smiled. "It is also," she said, "one of the most honest things I have heard in years. You could have lied to me, could have maintained the fiction. But you chose truth. That speaks well of your character, girl." "So you do not condemn us," the Duke said carefully. "Condemn you?" she laughed, a surprisingly girlish sound. "My boy, I ran away with an actor when I was 17. My parents dragged me back and forced me to marry the Duke of Marlborough instead, and I spent 50 years in a marriage that was duty, not love. You two have found something real. Why on earth would I condemn that?" She leaned forward, her eyes intense. "Society is built on lies," she said. "Marriages arranged for money and power, couples who hate each other but smile for appearances, children conceived with other men's wives, fortunes built on exploitation. Your little deception, your arrangement that became love, that is nothing compared to the hypocrisy that surrounds us every day." "Then you will not expose us," I said. "Expose you," she scoffed. "Child, I will be your greatest advocate. I will tell everyone who asks that you are a love match, that the Duke is the happiest I have seen him in years, that you are exactly what this family needed. And if Lady Hartwick or anyone else tries to whisper scandal, I will crush them with a word." "Why would you do this for us?" the Duke asked. "Because Victoria would have wanted it," she said softly. "She would have wanted you to be happy, Julian. She loved you in her way. And she would not have wanted you to spend your life alone, punishing yourself for a tragedy you could not prevent." The Duke's eyes filled with tears, the first I had ever seen from him. "Thank you," he whispered. We left the dowager's home in a daze, scarcely able to believe what had happened. We had expected judgment and received blessing. We had feared exposure and found protection. The most influential woman in society had decided to champion us, and with her support, the whispers and doubts would fade to nothing. That night, the Duke came to my chambers. Not furtively, not hiding, but openly, as a husband coming to his wife. We had not been intimate yet, had been too consumed with Amelia's illness and the complications of our situation. But now, with truth spoken and love declared, there was nothing holding us back. He kissed me in the doorway, deep and long and full of promise. I kissed him back, all the fear and doubt of the past months melting away under the heat of his touch. He lifted me, carried me to the bed that had once belonged to his first wife, and laid me down with a gentleness that made my heart ache. "Are you certain?" he asked, his hand cupping my face. "We can wait. We have time." "I am certain," I said. "I want this. I want you." What followed was tender and awkward and beautiful. The fumbling intimacy of two people learning each other for the first time. He was patient, careful of my inexperience, and when it was over, we lay tangled together in sheets that smelled of lavender and new beginnings. "I love you," he said into my hair. "I will love you for the rest of my life." "I love you too," I said, more than I knew was possible. The weeks that followed were the happiest of my life. Amelia grew stronger every day, taking short walks in the gardens, laughing at the Duke's terrible jokes, becoming friends with the staff who doted on her. The Duke and I settled into married life, not the pretend version we had performed for society, but the real thing, full of small intimacies and quiet joys. Breakfasts together. Evenings in the library, stolen kisses in empty corridors, and slowly, carefully, we began to heal. The Duke spoke more often about Victoria, about the guilt he had carried, and I listened without judgment, helping him see that forgiveness was possible, even for things we blamed ourselves for. I told him about my years of loneliness, of feeling invisible, of believing I would never matter to anyone, and he held me and promised that I would never be invisible again. In March, we held a ball at Ashford Manor, the first in 3 years. The house blazed with light and laughter, filled with guests who came out of curiosity and stayed because they could see plainly that the Duke and his Duchess were genuinely happy. Catherine Fairchild told me it was the event of the season. The Dowager Duchess of Marlborough pronounced it delightful. Even Lady Hartwick came, though she left early, her face sour with defeat. I danced with my husband in the ballroom, where I had first appeared as his pretend wife, and the difference was staggering. Then I had been terrified, playing a role, praying not to fail. Now I was simply myself, Eleanor, the Duchess, the woman he loved. At midnight, as the last guest departed, the Duke pulled me out onto the terrace, where we could see the stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked, taking my offer, agreeing to this mad scheme. "Never," I said. "Not for a moment, even though it was built on lies. It was built on desperation," I said, "on need, on 2 broken people trying to survive. But what we have now that is built on truth, on choice, on love, and that makes all the difference." He kissed me under those stars, and I tasted the future on his lips. A future of mornings waking beside him, of children we would raise together, of growing old in this house that had become home. A future I had never dared to imagine when I was just a governess with no prospects and a dying sister. I had been hired to play the role of Duchess for 3 months. I had been paid £5,000 to pretend to be his wife. And somehow, impossibly, the pretense had become reality. The arrangement had become love. The deception had transformed into the truest thing I had ever known. Spring came to Ashford Manor slowly that year, snowdrops pushing through frozen earth, bare branches beginning to show the first hints of green. Amelia ventured farther each day, her strength returning, her laughter ringing through rooms that had been silent too long. The Duke smiled more, the shadows in his eyes fading as he learned to forgive himself, to accept happiness, to believe in second chances. And I learned that I was not invisible after all. I was seen. I was loved. I was home. On a warm afternoon in April, the Duke and I stood in the gardens, watching Amelia pick flowers for the dinner table. She looked almost healthy now, her cheeks pink, her movements easy. She had a future ahead of her, chances we had thought were lost forever. "Thank you," I said to him, "for saving her, for saving me." "You saved me first," he said. "You walked into my life when I was drowning in grief and guilt, and you pulled me back to shore. Everything else, that is just gratitude." I took his hand, lacing our fingers together. "We should renew our vows," I said. "Do it properly this time, in a church with real witnesses. Make it official in every way." "We are already married," he pointed out. "I know," I said. "But I want to marry you again. I want to stand before God and everyone and choose you freely, with no contracts, no arrangements, just love." He pulled me close, resting his forehead against mine. "Then we will," he said. "We will marry again as many times as you want. Every day, if it pleases you." "Once more is enough," I said, laughing. "Though I will hold you to that promise." "Which promise?" the one about loving me for the rest of your life. He kissed me then, deep and long and full of promise. That promise, he said against my lips, is the easiest one I will ever keep. We married again in May in the small church on the Ashford estate, with Amelia as my only attendant and Catherine Fairchild and the Earl of Thornbury as our witnesses. The Dowager Duchess of Marlborough sent her blessing and an enormous arrangement of roses. Mrs. Daventry cried, which shocked everyone, including herself. And when the vicar pronounced us husband and wife, when the Duke kissed me in front of God and everyone, I knew that this time it was real in every possible way. We were not a fairy tale. We were two people who had found each other in the midst of desperation and deception, who had chosen to build something true from the wreckage of our pasts. We were flawed and complicated and learning as we went. But we were together. We were in love. And that, I had learned, was worth more than any fortune, any title, any pretense. The Duke had paid £5,000 for a governess to pose as his wife for 3 months. He had gotten a lifetime of love instead. And I, who had accepted his offer out of desperation, had found something I had never known I was searching for. I had found home, not in a place, but in a person, in us, in the love we had built together, one honest moment at a time. That night, as we lay together in bed, the windows open to let in the spring air, he traced patterns on my skin and whispered plans for our future. "Children," he said, "at least 3. A boy who will be Duke after me, and daughters as fierce and beautiful as their mother." "You are very presumptuous," I teased. "I am optimistic," he corrected. "For the first time in years, I can imagine a future that does not hurt to contemplate. That is your gift to me, Eleanor. Hope." "You gave me the same," I said. "You gave me a life beyond survival. You gave me everything." "No," he said, pulling me closer. "We gave each other everything. And that is what makes it perfect." I fell asleep in his arms, safe and loved and home. And I knew that whatever challenges we faced in the years ahead, we would face them together. Not as Duke and Governess playing roles, but as husband and wife, bound by love freely chosen and honestly earned. The pretense was over. The truth had won. And we, against all odds and all expectations, had found our happy ending, not because it was written in the stars or fated by Providence, but because we chose it. Every day, with every honest word and every genuine touch, we chose each other. We chose love. We chose truth. And that choice, more than any sum of money or any title or any arrangement, was what made us real.